Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our webinar this afternoon. Our webinar is entitled You Are Not Alone, Supporting Dreamers and Families of Undocumented Status. And we have 3 organizations that are here bringing you this training today. The Center for Childhood Resilience at the Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital, the Illinois Childhood Trauma Coalition, and the National Immigrant Justice Center. We are going to begin our day with a brief presentation, about 40 minutes. After that, we're going to be providing you with an opportunity to ask some questions of some additional panelists that will include our speakers and some other guests. During the course of the webinar, if you have any questions, go ahead and just post them onto the comment line on Facebook, and we will be collecting those and trying to answer all of them during the question and answer period. So please feel free to go ahead and send them to us. If there's any additional questions that we don't get to, we will be sure to put those up at the end and provide you with an additional email where you can send us additional questions. So in terms of why we're here today, the reason that we came together to create this webinar today is that following the presidential election, we have been notified that calls to Illinois and national mental health and social service agencies have dramatically increased. With the inauguration of the new presidential administration, we want to be prepared for the potential repeal of DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And so we organized this webinar really as an alert. We want those of you that work in the front line with students and with young people to be prepared so that you can help those students make sense out of what's happening around them. We heard yesterday from a press conference that at this point, the administration has indicated that they will not be directly, immediately doing anything with DACA. However, we want to be making sure that we understand the concerns of the DACA youth, and from what they're telling us, they will be focusing on undocumented individuals who have a criminal background first. But we certainly know that this real possibility is out there that DACA could be repealed, so we want to make sure you feel like you are prepared for a public health response. So what we really are thinking about today, and from a mental health perspective, is making sure that if you're working with any marginalized communities, and particularly undocumented during this time of transition, that you feel prepared to look for signs and symptoms of distress, to recognize the kinds of questions that they might be having, anticipate them so that you can find the answers and know the resources in your community where you can link kids to services. There are many folks that have mobilized services, and we want to make sure that you are able to access them. So our plan this morning, we have several speakers that are going to do this presentation. The first one that you will be talking with and hearing from is Claudio Rivera. He's a postdoctoral fellow here at the Center for Childhood Resilience, and he will be sharing some information with you. After that, you'll be hearing from Rebecca Ford-Poss, who's a clinical psychologist on our team at the Center for Childhood Resilience, and she's also the co-chair of the Refugee and Immigrant Coalition, or the Refugee and Immigrant Task Force of the Illinois Childhood Trauma Coalition. And then finally, you'll be hearing from Ruth Lopez McCarthy, who is one of the managing attorneys for the National Immigrant Justice Center. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Rivera to come up here with us and move us forward.
Welcome everyone, I'm Claudio Rivera. The presentation will be broken down into 3 parts. The first part of the presentation will be facilitated by Dr. Ford-Poss and I, and it will be a presentation of materials developed to help equip youth-serving adults to respond to the distress of youth of undocumented status resulting from the current political events and rhetoric. The second part of the presentation will be a presentation on legal issues impacting youth and families of undocumented status, and that will be led by Ruth Lopez McCarthy. The third part of our presentation we're hoping will be a bit more interactive, in that we'll have a Q&A regarding mental health tips and legal tips and resources. Within days of the presidential election in November, we were made aware of reports that children and youth are experiencing significant distress. Youth who have been affected include frequently marginalized youth, such as refugee, immigrant, undocumented, LGBTQ, and religious and racial minority youth and communities in Chicago and around. There is evidence that some students have interpreted the political rhetoric as giving them permission to bully other students of color and those of minority status. Youth who are victimized by bullies are at risk of severe mental health concerns. Evidence of these concerns have been seen in the dramatic increase in the number of Illinois and national mental health and social service agency hotline calls. College and community counseling centers are being flooded with calls for support, for ways to support their students on their campuses. And schools have reported instances of increased instances of hate speech, racist vandalism, students being fearful of attending school, and having to cancel classes due to safety concerns. For the purpose of today's presentation, we're going to be focusing specifically on the experience of those individuals of undocumented status and their families. We're asking professionals and community members who work with and know those of undocumented status to be vigilant for signs of serious emotional distress and suicidality, now and at the times of policy change to come in the future that may impact this and other marginalized populations. First, I want to provide some clarity on some terminology, because sometimes there are terms that are used interchangeably, but there are some slight differences. Immigrants of undocumented status is the most inclusive term, as it encompasses those who qualify for DACA, as well as any other immigrants of undocumented status who do not. When referring to those of undocumented status, the definition for undocumented refers to those who are foreign-born non-citizens residing in the United States, having either entered the United States without authorization or having entered the United States with authorization, but then losing that temporary authorization along the way. There's a specific category of those of undocumented status that are referred to as dreamers, and these are the undocumented youth that were brought to the United States as children. The Dreamers take their name from the DREAM Act, which is the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act, which was legislation put forth in Congress in the early 2000s that has since stalemated and never came to materialize. This legislation would have allowed those individuals of undocumented status who were residing in the United States without authorization to obtain work permits, social security numbers, driver's license, and eventually establish a pathway towards citizenship. Although the DREAM Act failed, the name stuck and is now used to refer to those immigrants of undocumented status who arrive here as children and are under the age of 30. Though the DREAM Act never came to be, the previous presidential administration put forth an executive action referred to as a Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or better known as DACA. DACA was essentially a protection for eligible individuals who have to have deferred deportation for 2 years, and during this 2-year deferment period, made them eligible for obtaining a license, a social security number, as well as a legal work permit. It's estimated that around 750,000 DACA youth and individuals came out of the shadows and registered with the U.S. government as a result of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals executive action being put forth. In a sense, DACA youth and individuals were afforded a certain level of opportunity and privilege, being able to work, and it's one that not others, or at least to obtain legal employment, and that's not an opportunity that has been afforded to other immigrants of undocumented status. Now that this privilege is at risk of being revoked or being changed in some way, there are youth who are feeling some of the same stress that has been a constant and chronic stress for others of undocumented status that have been feeling it for some time. Lastly, I did want to also make a point about that many of individuals of undocumented status also live within the context of families, and there are mixed status families, and that is one way of referring to families that have individuals who may be of undocumented status, who may be naturally born citizens here in the United States, and also may have individuals who are undocumented status and eligible for DACA. So the threat of deportation puts youth of undocumented status and mixed status families at increased risk for emotional distress and crisis. For immigrant children and those of mixed status families, fear of being forcibly separated from family through deportation is clearly traumatic and threatening, especially due to many immigrant populations' emphasis on the centrality of family. Many youth and their families risk their lives to come to the United States to reunite with family members and have themselves often escaped traumatic and life-threatening events in their home countries that propelled them to seek refuge among family and relatives here in the United States. Panic, hopelessness, and helplessness arise from the threat of separation from family or of the return to life-threatening circumstances. For many of these youth, the United States is the only country they have known, and they are scared of both the educational and employment disruption that may come and the and the deportation that may come with the deportation to their countries of origin. Many of which they are uncertain about the realities of what exists back home. They would not be able to provide them with a social support network or resources that would allow them to obtain education and employment in their country of origin. In thinking about the best ways to support youth of undocumented status, it's also important to think about the intersectionality of identities. When we think about the different subgroups of the population impacted by the current political climate, many of the youth have multiple identities, such that a child may not only be of undocumented status, but also identify as a black, gay, cisgender male. Thus, youth may be at increased risk for distress if they have more than one of these characteristics. Among these youth especially vulnerable are visible minorities, those that may be targeted due to skin color or to style of dress, for example, individuals who may wear a hijab. We also can include gender non-conforming youth, refugee and immigrant children and adolescents, as this population may not receive the help they need, as many of these families do not have access to the traditional mental health services and lack access to other supports and services. We also can include recipients of DACA, or the Dreamers, as we previously mentioned. Also, those whose family members may be of undocumented status and are experiencing the same distress, so also referring to those of mixed status families. Those with limited English proficiency, as this can serve as an increased barrier to help seeking and access to care. Those exposed to others' suicidal behavior, given the contagion effect that we know of when becoming aware of suicide completion, it can increase suicidal thoughts and ideation amongst those who have pre-existing risk for suicide. And lastly, those who are also especially vulnerable are those with those pre-existing risk factors for suicidal behavior, which includes depression, individuals with depression and anxiety disorders, prior suicide attempts or self-harming behaviors, substance use or substance dependency, those with impulsive or aggressive behavior, or those who are socially withdrawn and isolated. So I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Fortpass.
Thank you, Claudio. Before we get into the details of mental health supports for Dreamers and families of undocumented status, I want to make a couple key points about how to help. First, I want to start by saying uncertainty breeds anxiety. And if you think about how difficult it has been for us as adults to make sense of the socio-political climate, it's confusing for us. It's exponentially confusing for kids. When there's no clear answers, anxious kids tend to fill in the blanks with catastrophic predictions. So Dreamers are really going to need us to be their rock, to help them stay calm, to help them analyze things rationally. We cannot allow our fear, our sadness, and our anger to escalate to panic and hysteria and hopelessness. For youth of undocumented status at this time, it's important to validate their concerns and avoid dismissing or challenging a young person's fears. We want to recognize that the threats to immigration rights are serious and refrain from making any promises that we cannot guarantee. However, at the same time, we want to let them know that while we don't have all of the answers at this moment, we are actively working to seek out information as it becomes available, and that there are people organizing to safeguard their rights. All right. In my clinical work with immigrant families, I woke up on Wednesday, November 9th, asking myself, what am I going to say to the kids and the families that I see? How can I possibly be strong for them to help promote their own resilience? We've assembled some tips for what adults can do to support youth struggling at this time. And these can be found on our CCR website, listed at the end of this presentation. And we're going to break each one of these out in the slides to follow. We want to point out that not every distressed child constitutes a mental health crisis. So if you think about a public health model of intervention, we would like you to consider steps 1 through 6, a universal intervention that will likely be sufficient to reassure and calm and instill hope in most youth. We would also like to equip our frontline people with information as to when a youth is going to need more than just these tips. So targeted intervention will be necessary with a smaller group and would entail follow-up with a trained mental health professional for further assessment and intervention. All of these tips that we discussed today are things that we would like our community leaders to have so that they can feel equipped to respond appropriately. So please feel free to send this out, blast this out to your contact list. Okay, So first and foremost, we want to communicate with our words and our behavior that we are going to keep kids safe. Kids are scared by adult reactions like strong emotions and violence and talking about moving to other countries. This makes kids think that the adults in their lives are not in control of the situation and cannot keep them safe. So we want to avoid immersing ourselves in the news and the Facebook posts. We don't want to avoid ranting and raving and acting impulsively. We need to remember that kids are watching us and are basing their reaction on ours. So one of the big messages we want to get out is that adults around you will protect you. So it's important for parents, it's important for adults in kids' lives to be taking care of themselves and modeling good coping skills. Secondly, we want to ensure and promote safety. So many of the racist and hateful things people are saying and doing are not only wrong, but they're also against the law. So we want people to be reaching out to authorities and leaders who can help hold individuals accountable for promoting hatred. So we would encourage people to call 911, even if it is to make an anonymous report. We recommend this, one, because it's the most immediate response for public safety, but also for accurate documentation of hate crimes. We do know that there's reason for concern in many communities of color for trustworthiness of law enforcement and discomfort in contacting law enforcement, so we wanted to give some alternatives to calling 911. So one would be to call the Southern Poverty Law Center, which keeps a registry of hate crimes. On a more local level, people could talk to their local aldermen or to their clergy people, or contacting a refugee immigrant serving agency like the ones you see listed here. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but something to get you started. Thirdly, we want to connect with social support and decrease sense of social isolation. So universities and schools, I know, are offering circles of support and other safe spaces for students to express concerns and seek support. Some schools have been putting up posters reading "I matter" and "I will fight for" fill in the blank, so I will fight for immigrants, for example. Other schools have circulated petitions to become sanctuary universities. We definitely want to also connect our youth with their faith communities, as we know that faith community is a source of support for many of our immigrant youth. Next is kind of a basic civics lesson. We want to remind children that we have a government system of checks and balances, that there are democratic processes in local, state, and federal governments, and that generally these processes are slow. Secondly, lawmakers can use the democratic processes to prevent individuals from making decisions unilaterally, so debate and discourse will ensue with political and community groups championing immigrant rights. Also, it is unclear at this point how repealing an executive order will translate into actual enforcement of immigration policies. So we're not clear how quickly this will proceed and who it will impact. 5, we want to remind kids that there is still hope and that people will fight for them. So just knowing that there are organizations out there who will safeguard their rights can be reassuring to you. Human and civil rights organizations will fight for individuals' rights to prevent unlawful decisions. And increasing kids' sense of control and influence over their environment and their future actually promotes hope. So by donating to or volunteering with these organizations, adults and youth both increase social support and sense of control over their situation. We've put together a list of human and civil rights organizations that have been and will fight for individuals' rights and prevent unlawful decisions, such as the ACLU and the Anti-Defamation League, but there are many others on the local level as well. And also we want to remind them that the U.S. is a country of immigrants. Engraved on the Statue of Liberty, it reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." Our country is founded on the principles of freedom of religion, and we accept differences of opinions in the democracy, and individuals can and should stand up for what they believe is right. Okay, our knowledge about coping with trauma and helping kids cope with trauma has actually taught us several lessons that are applicable in this potentially traumatic political climate for our youth. So things that I'm going to list here are examples of adaptive coping strategies. So things like keeping family and school routines creates a sense of predictability and safety that kids are going to need at a time like this. That includes keeping up cultural rituals and celebrations. We also want to make sure that we are limiting media consumption and exposure to avoid that repetitive bombardment of images and messages that remind kids of traumatic events. So this can be, avoiding watching the news 24 hours a day, or avoiding immersing yourself in Facebook political posts all day long. We also want to make sure to process what these kids are hearing on a regular basis so that we can help them dispel misinformation. Rumors are very scary, and kids need a place to talk about that. This is also a good time to be teaching or maintaining regular relaxation practice and getting them talking and spending time with family, friends, and faith communities talking about things other than politics. Using distraction and using humor, consuming humor is going to be important at a time like this. And simple things like making sure that you're scheduling enjoyable routine activities such as time for your hobby and watching the sunset and playing with pets. Keeping that routine regularity in your life is going to be important. And also getting regular exercise, making sure you're getting self-expression outlets, whether it's creative, writing a song, or poetry, drawing, writing in a journal. These are all good ways for kids to express themselves and get negative emotions out. Helping kids avoid substance use and isolation is going to be key as well. Now, we realize that there are going to be some kids for whom this is not going to be enough, and so it is important for those of you working with youth, living with dreamers, to make sure that you are abreast of what some of the signs and symptoms are of severe emotional distress and potential suicide. So these are some of the key things we want you to be looking for. So withdrawing from family and friends, dramatic mood changes, either in the negative direction and the positive direction. Kids threatening to kill themselves, talking, thinking, writing about death or suicide, whether it's in a note or a Facebook post or a text. We take all of those threats very seriously. Kids who are feeling hopeless and helpless despite the reassurances that you've given them. Kids who are demonstrating unusually reckless behaviors are at increased risk. And kids who are doing anything that is in the form of saying goodbye, giving away prized possessions, lingering over farewells. Those are things that we would want to take note of and make sure that we're linking those kids with services and getting them evaluated. So I would like to give things back to Dr. Rivera at this point to talk about that linkage process.
I just wanted to follow up the final point of linking with available services. We're making available 2 resource lists to share with you all today. One is a resource list to link youth, families, and professionals with crisis intervention information and providers who can offer support. And the second one is a list of civil and human rights organizations in which people can become involved in and advance advocacy efforts to support the individuals of undocumented status. These resource lists are available at the Center for Childhood Resilience website, which is lurie-childrens.org/youarenot-alone, and at the Kennedy Forum, which is www.thekennedyforum.org/resources. I'd also like to share crisis response resources for if and when you encounter children and youth in a crisis or emergency. If you do identify signs of severe distress that is not responsive to the reassurances and suggestions we have provided here today, people have been asking about where to refer children and adolescents who need this crisis intervention. Obviously, if they are in any imminent danger to themselves, we would want you to call 911 or take them to the nearest emergency room. If calling 911 within the city of Chicago, a request for a CIT trained officer can be made by telling the dispatcher that this is a mental health emergency. CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Trained. There are also several crisis lines that will help you link to urgent care services, and these are just some of the resources made available that are also the resources that are posted on our website. Lastly, in wanting to promote the health and well-being of youth and families of undocumented status, it's important to convey a message of hope and action. We want to let them know that they are not alone, that they are a part of what makes this country great, and they have already made great contributions and have many more to make. We also want to let them know that the struggle and the fight is not over. It's been an ongoing one, and y que la lucha sigue, that we're going to be going forward, standing alongside them in the struggle to advocate for their rights. There is still hope. There's also a lot of resiliency that we see amongst this population, and we want to make sure that we take a strength-based approach to emphasizing all the strengths and contributions that they provide for us in our communities. And there's plenty of ways for all of us to get involved to make sure that we're taking action steps to support these individuals of undocumented status. I wanted to now pass it over to Dr. Cicchetti, so she's going to provide specifics on one particular effort that's happening here in the city of Chicago.
Thank you. So in light of all of these concerns that are going on, we just wanted to make sure that those of you that are watching that are here local in Chicago or in the state of Illinois, that you're aware of some efforts that have gone on in the city. Immediately after the election, the mayor of Chicago did declare that Chicago was determined to maintain its status as a sanctuary city in its efforts to protect immigrant families. The other thing that happened from that was there was an outpouring of support. Different people from different areas that had different skill sets were looking for ways that they could support youth and families that were impacted by this. And the city responded by creating a new task force called the Chicago is With You Task Force. That is being run through the Office of New Americans at the City of Chicago. And it's really looking at 4 subcommittees that are bringing together lots of agencies from across the city that are interested in providing their expertise and support to folks. One of those is the Mental Health and Wellness Committee, which is what the Center for Childhood Resilience and the Illinois Childhood Trauma Coalition are part of. The second one is a Legal Protection Subcommittee, which you will be meeting someone from that group momentarily. There's also a task force that's really thinking about how business members can get involved and look for opportunities to both educate their employees and also speak the stories of their employees and get those messages out. And then the final one is really going to be focused on community outreach and education using all community members, whether that be navigators, educators, folks working in the faith community, to really provide them with information that anyone coming to them will be able to be linked to appropriate services to learn about their legal rights as well as their mental health services. So if you're interested in learning more about that, there will soon be a website, but it's just getting off the ground at this point. So the easiest way to learn more about that initiative at this point would be to go ahead and contact Carrie Shepard, who works in the Office of New Americans, and he will link you to some information. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn it over. Like we said, this is a collaborative focus, and we know that many of the questions that many of the families are struggling with are not necessarily directly related to mental health. So we'd like to introduce to you another member of the Chicago is With You Task Force. This is Ruth Lopez McCarthy, and she is a lawyer with the National Immigrant Justice Center, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the information about the legal rights.
Thank you, everyone. Excellent. So, as you've heard today, everyone has rights. You have rights, and there are things you can be doing now. So we'll review a little bit of those steps in this presentation. We're going to start out by saying it's important that everyone receive a legal consultation. There's an estimated 183,000 undocumented individuals living in the city of Chicago alone. And we have to remember that a lot of these individuals live in mixed status families, right? So that means that maybe somebody in that family member is a DACA recipient, and somebody is a U.S. citizen, and somebody else is undocumented. So there's a lot of different mixed status families, and that can mean a lot of different things when it comes to legal protection. Legal consultations are also important. What we've found, the Center for Migration Studies did a survey in 2014. About 14.3% of individuals screened for DACA were actually eligible for a more permanent type of relief, right? So what that was is varied. We'll go over a little bit of what some of those types of relief could be, but that's a huge number of people who thought they had DACA but were actually eligible for, could get on a pathway towards U.S. citizenship. We always want to tell people to be careful for notarios, notary publics, scammers. They're always out there, especially in this time of need, when people are really looking for answers. Just please be careful. Always consult with a licensed attorney, Board of Immigration Appeals, recognized organization, and I'll give you more information a little bit later on that. So permanent legal options, again, legal screenings, these are super important for you to think about and get, because there's family petitions, permanent residency, so if somebody's a U.S. citizen, they could possibly apply for you. It's been a long time since DACA came in. Did you fall in love? Did you get married? You know, what happened within your family structure during that time? You know, go to legal screening. You may find out something that you didn't know and be pleasantly surprised. If you were a victim of a crime, U visas are available, T visas are available for people who are victims of crime or trafficking. You know, so please think about those as options. There are VAWA petitions for survivors of domestic violence. You know, immigration, their relief for deportation proceedings. So those of you who may find yourself in a deportation proceeding, you know, you may have relief that results in a more permanent type of legal option. Asylum, and then there's special juvenile victims visas. So please think about all of these as legal options. Get a legal screening. You know, ask about some of these. You can go on to our website, find out more information, but really look at legal screenings to find out about these permanent legal options. Do you want to talk about DACA, since we know that that's really, you know, what we've heard about recently, but what could be stopped? You heard a little earlier from the doctor about DACA itself, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. What we want to remember is that that was a discretionary relief that President Obama put into place. It's unclear what the Trump administration will be doing with DACA. We know that they haven't done anything yet, right? But it's still up in the air as to what could happen. Obviously, there's concern for so many reasons about that, but specifically for DACA youth and parents, right? These DACA youth came, they gave all their information to the federal government, they went through fingerprints, they went through background checks, you know, they gave their parent information. So the concern is there, and there are 4 potential scenarios that could happen. You know, DACA continues, which it currently is. You know, nothing has happened with DACA, it's continued. DACA is terminated. Your employment authorization document, which is called an EAD, that you get when you through DACA, remains valid until expiration. The other option is that DACA and EADs are terminated. That requires notice, so that means that the federal government has to actually serve each person that has DACA with a notice that it'll be terminated, which requires a lot of resources. And then DACA and EADs are terminated and individuals are targeted for deportation. Again, remember I just said that EADs they're required to give notice if they're going to cancel those. So if that were the case, what we know is that there would be probably federal litigation over the fact that they haven't given that notice. Current status in Illinois, there are about 40,000 residents that have DACA. And we know that, like I had mentioned earlier, DACA applications continue to be processed. So there's a large number, there's a large community, and there's a even larger community of advocates behind that 40,000. What's happening at a federal level is that there is an affirmative bill called the Bridge Act that was reintroduced. It was an older bill that was reintroduced by Senators Durbin and Graham in the Senate, and in the House of Representatives by Mike Kaufman and our own representative Luis Gutierrez. So our senators in Illinois are really leading the charge on keeping our DACA youth and our immigrants safe. The Bridge Act provides temporary protection to people who are eligible for DACA. Applicants have to meet the same requirements as they do DACA, and then pay a fee, undergo criminal background check, demonstrate they're not a threat to public safety, establish early age entry with continuous presence in the United States, show that they've pursued an education. And it would last for 3 years. It would continue work authorization, but it's just a more permanent form of temporary relief. It does not offer a pathway to citizenship. It is not. It's not that full solution, but it is a way to continue your work authorization and keep our DACA students and those who have DACA safe. Right now, it's going to require a lot of your support and a lot of advocacy on our behalf. So we encourage everyone to reach out to their local senators, their local congressmen, and make sure that they're advocating for the Bridge Act. So please. That's your first step. Important to know, right? Everyone does have rights. I think I started by saying we all have rights. Everyone, no matter what your status is, you have rights. So please, this is a very quick Know Your Rights. There are much longer presentations, and you will be able to find those on NIJC's website and lots of other organizations, which I think will be handing out resources for that later on. But let's go over some quick Know Your Rights. So regardless of immigration status, you have the right to remain silent. So if you encounter law enforcement, you have the right to remain silent. You also have the right to be represented by an attorney. So we know that in police court, public defender will help you. In immigration court, it is at your own expense, so please note that. You have the right to refuse to sign any document that you don't understand. You also have the right to request a local telephone call. It's going to be very hard. I know in this day and age, everyone keeps their phone numbers on their cell phone, but it's going to be important that you start memorizing the name, the phone numbers, your phone number, your family's phone numbers, those close to you. So please just make sure that you're thinking about what that looks like. And we'll go over some more safety kind of plans preparing. And again, beware of notarios and attorneys that are acting improperly. Report any of those instances to the Illinois Attorney General or the ARDC via their websites. They all have links that you can report, these people acting in bad faith. That usually happens when we're in that kind of this state of crisis and people are looking for information. So please do that. All right. It's also important to be prepared. I think in any situation, it's always important to know where your documents are, know what's happening, and make sure you have your continuous residence information together. But here are just a few tips on creating kind of a safety and action plan. So identify who is your emergency contact. Memorize their phone number and know when they're going to be home. Make sure that you have somebody who is ready to pick up that phone 24 hours a day if they get a phone call. Because if you're arrested, the phone number, it's not going to come from your phone. It's going to come from the police office phone. Memorize your A number. So every immigrant has an A number, and make sure you give that. That's going to be your identification. Make sure that you give that to your emergency contact. You either had it when you filed your petition, they gave you one, or when you are detained, they will give you an A number. So make sure that you know that and you're able to give that to your emergency contact. If you have children, provide your child's school or daycare with emergency contact name and phone number, and make sure that that person has authorization to pick up your child in any kind of emergency. Also, as it comes to medical decisions and legal decisions for your child, really just think about who that person would be, who's best suited to make sure that they're taking care of your child in any kind of a situation. Keep your passport, identity information, proof of physical presence in the U.S., financial information, all that in a safe location. Those are things you can start doing today, preparing your documents, get them in order so that they're it's easy to pick up and have for your emergency contact. Again, make sure that things like your driver's licenses are renewed, or your state IDs. Make sure that things are current at this time so that you're set. And then I just want to share the National Immigrant Justice Center. We provide representation for legal matters. We have special intake hours. Here's our information. We are opening up a new intake day on the northwest side of Chicago in the Belmont-Cragen area at 5715 West Belmont. That will begin in February, and we'll be taking appointments there, as well as opening another intake day at our downtown location. So we're really making sure that we are doing as many legal screenings, and we'll be representing as many people as possible during this time. But again, it's important to seek out those legal screenings, whether it's through NIJC or through another BIA accredited BIA accredited organization or another legal entity. Please just make sure you're going to a place that is reputable and that can really give you the correct information. And it's always, if you want second opinions, it's always a good idea to get another opinion. That's always good. So there are intake hours, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ruth. Before you leave, can you just answer one question, even as the rest of our panelists come and join us? As people are listening to this, we have quite a few people on this Facebook Live page, and I know that those were local numbers.
Yes.
What would you recommend for people who are outside of the Chicago area in terms of accessing those same kinds of things?
You can always go to the American Immigration Lawyers Association. AILA has a list of immigration lawyers throughout the United States that can always help. You can go to the BIA website, which is the Board of Immigration Appeals. They'll tell you where there are accredited BIA reps. And BIA reps have had to go through 40 hours of legal training. They're overseen by organizations that have this experience. So I would look at attorneys and look at BIA accredited reps if you're looking for legal screenings.
So no matter where you are in this country, there should be some resources and information for you,
Of course.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
So really our goal at this point is to move from some of the information that we wanted to share with you to addressing some of the questions that those of you that have joined us today have to ask us. I appreciate some of you have already put some of those questions on the comment line, but feel free to add additional questions as we introduce you to the remainder of our panelists. You've already met some of our folks. We have Dr. Ford Pass right here. We have Ruth Lopez McCarthy, and we have Dr. Claudio Rivera down at the end. But we also have two additional folks that are joining us who, if you were with us on our first webinar, you might recognize as well. And these are some of our adult mental health experts as well. So we have Myra Chacon, who is from the mental health, we have two of you actually from the Mental Health Coalition for Undocumented Immigrants, and you each represent different agencies. We have Dr. Myra Chacon, who's also from Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and Maria Ferreira, who is also from DePaul Department of Social Work. So thank you, doctors, as well for joining us. I'm going to start by posing some of the questions that we've already seen come through. There was one pretty active dialogue that we saw that was focused on the question of health insurance. So I wondered if maybe, I know Dr. Rivera, you mentioned something about that. Could you try to provide some initial answers on children in terms of insurance, and then perhaps some of the rest of you can talk about adult insurance access?
That's right. As it relates to minors, and I'll speak a little louder because I don't know if the microphone's picking up, but as it relates to minors of undocumented status within the state of Illinois, Illinois offers the All Kids program, and that's a program for children who need affordable health insurance, and that is regardless of immigration status or health condition. So that's something that anybody under the age of 18, as long as they meet all the other eligibility criteria, would be able to utilize the All Kids Illinois Health Program. That varies by state, and I know other states don't offer that same thing. I'm familiar with Illinois' health coverage, so I would advise individuals to look and see state by state how that varies.
And someone specifically also questioned, will that have any problem? If you become enrolled in All Kids, would that cause any challenges for you later if you were seeking status?
No, that's right. So on the All Kids website, there's information with that particular question asking if the immigration status will affect child's ability to get All Kids, and if somebody does receive that care, will it then affect their ability to receive legal status in the future? And the answer to that is no, it doesn't affect that, because they don't ask for any information that would put that in jeopardy. So more of the details are available on the All Kids Illinois website, but yeah, that wouldn't at all complicate that.
Great, thank you. And Ruth, are there any other legal issues on the child front that you think, in terms of health insurance, that you'd want to add to that?
No, I wouldn't. In Illinois, it doesn't apply anyone.
And Myra, do you have some comments about adults and insurance and anything related to that?
No, fortunately, no, I don't have any.
Any other comments about that? So we know that there's opportunities out there, but it's very state by state, correct? So a couple of other legal questions that came in. One that you've addressed, but I think it would be good to reiterate. Are there legal resources that have begun? Are there folks that are already doing pro bono work?
Yes. So you can, like I said, we have our intake days that you can come in. There are lots of other resources that, clinics that will come up. This effort, we are partnering with community organizations to do info sessions, know your rights sessions, again, just really think through legal screenings and find reputable legal entities, BIA accredited representatives to walk you through that process.
So there's resources available right now for
Mhm.
both individual consultation and in general information seeking if people
Of course.
feel more comfortable.
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Perhaps something that Ruth mentioned previously is the fact that this is a time for opportunities for many people to try to, try to make money. And so she did it, she mentioned it to us several times. It is important for people to remember that, look always for places that you trust, organizations that you are familiar with. Don't just let yourself, be going to a place where they are promising something that in reality is not going to happen. So just be careful. That's a good advice.
And one more legal type question that came up was a question of, would you encourage immigrants to go ahead and attempt registering as soon as possible for DACA and some of these other programs, or is it problematic if they try to register and then they get rejected?
Yeah, I think it depends on your comfort level. We don't know what this administration will do in terms of DACA, and that was an executive order. The other forms of immigration relief, I think if they're available and you qualify and you've gone to a reputable, and you tell them the truth about your case and you walk through the process, there shouldn't be a problem in kind of knowing where you stand, right? But it all depends. Every case is different. Every fact pattern is different. So it really, I think, you go speak with somebody that you trust. If you have you walk out of there understanding and feeling confident, then it's dependent on everyone's comfort level. I know that they're processing DACA applications. It hasn't stopped because nothing's been issued, but again, it's really on everyone's comfort level.
I think people's concern too is that once they register, the government then has their name, correct? And that's where their anxiety is coming from, about whether to give the government their name and come out of the shadows. Yes.
Yes, yes, of course. I understand that fear. There are, in mixed status families, there are lots of different ways to seek other forms of relief, and just if you go to legal consultation doesn't mean that information will go to the federal government.
Well, and addressing the issue of trust, another question that came in is, as adults that are working with kids and families, how can we address the fear that maybe our families have even talking to us about this? How do we try to help be advocates and information providers when maybe people don't trust us? So maybe a couple of you could kind of comment on that, because that's more about mental health. It might have something to do with just the growing sense of fear or isolation. How do we, as caring adults, it sounds like, really try to decrease the fear around getting people to trust us and talk with us?
Yeah, and I think it's an important question. I think for a lot of these communities, they're within cultures that's very collectivist and interdependent. So to really build on their own network, who do they trust within their community? Those folks have sort of a relationship with them, and even though it may not be a traditional mental health provider, the relationship can really support them and sort of link them to resources that really are relevant for them in their context.
And in that same line, there was another comment that was, there's stigma in having these conversations at all. So even being on this website, someone mentioned, made them a little bit uncomfortable. So do you have suggestions around how we might decrease that stigma, in addition to connecting perhaps through those natural relationships and trusted community members? Are there other strategies that you have for addressing both the fear related to the immigrant status, but also the mental health kinds of questions?
I mean, I think, when we've been meeting as a coalition for undocumented immigrants, and a lot of what we're learning is that to take a stand wherever we are is going to be really critical and powerful, whether it be within a university, within a public school, within a community organization. I think a lot of these kids and families now, as you've talked about with the trust, they're questioning those who they've historically trusted. So being very vocal about it and saying, we have your back, I'm going to do the best I can to protect you. And this idea of developing sanctuary not only as a city, as a university institution, but it's also in spirit a very aggressive way of saying, let's do everything we can to protect you, support you, be vocal for you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I would just also say take a lead from the undocumented students themselves as what they're comfortable doing. Let them be the voice for what they need and what they want, and follow them, because this is the risks for them and their families, and so support what they're looking for, and be a good ally for what they need.
So that almost that bystander kind of a model, sort of step up and say, if you see something happening that you're not comfortable with, speak up for them, but also ask that classmate or a friend or a family member, what can I do to be supportive? How can we help make this school or this community feel safer for you? Those kinds of questions. And
yeah, I wanted to add something about the stigma question, because I think stigma around mental health issues existed long before the election and the political climate. So just in general thoughts on that issue. I think that sometimes stigma is coming from the idea that if I open up to somebody, is that information going to go public? Is that going to be shared out? So I think sometimes it helps to educate people that there are laws in place to protect private health information, so the HIPAA law, that information that's shared in the context of psychiatric or psychological treatment is confidential and will not be shared out. I think sometimes it's just a question of normalizing distress, and of course you're distressed with everything that's going on, and letting them know that they are not the only one distressed, and of course they need some support in this climate, and dispelling some of the myths, like just because you're feeling depressed does not mean you're crazy, and that I understand what you're going through, why you are feeling the way you're feeling, and so there's no shame in seeking support for feeling depressed or feeling anxious at this time, and both of those things are things that are treatable in the short term. So I think that just basic psychoeducation about normalization of this, and also letting them know that treatment works and treatment doesn't need to last forever, and that there are qualified people out there to help them. I think another place where we can have a way of getting to some of our distressed populations are through settings where they already are. Instead of asking them to come to clinics, getting into the school systems. There are school-based clinics, there are school-based interventions going on currently. So directing them back to their school counselor, directing them back to school-based mental health professionals may be a place where they feel a little bit more comfortable going and being a little bit more familiar with that setting.
And there's less stigma because it's happening in a school where kids are used to going. And they also might meet some other students. There's some groups that are going on in some schools around this that might provide them with an opportunity to meet other students who are having some similar feelings, which can be in and of itself, a really important thing for kids.
Right. If I could just circle back for a moment about the question about adults insurance, and I think that one of the things that we can explore too are clinics that offer sliding scale fees, so that if you encounter an adult who is in need of treatment, don't despair and just leave it there. I think we want to really call some clinics and find out, do you offer sliding scale? Is there anyone there who can offer pro bono or charity services? Because I think if you don't explore those options, you won't. If you don't ask, you won't find out, right? So I think absolutely advocate and help connect people.
And I did have one more point to circle back to the stigma. It has been a long-standing issue, not just amongst the undocumented immigrant community, but amongst a bunch of other underserved communities. And I think one of the, since given the long-standing nature of this, a long-term solution can be to then provide more opportunities and training for individuals from underrepresented backgrounds to then be in positions to be these clinicians and service providers, so that then that can establish a level of trust that members from their community are the ones who are providing the direct service to those individuals in those communities.
I think that it might make also, you know, the same way that the city has publicly said that we are going to protect you. I think it is a good idea for all those organizations that are, you know, already serving individuals in that situation to say, like, you are safe here. You know, not just to put the mental health profession in a situation where they have to, but in general, you know, this is a safe place. You can come, you can talk to us, and so by doing that, we are opening many more, you know, spaces where people can feel safe, and where people can feel that they can come and talk about not just about their immigration situation, but also to talk about how they are feeling and how they are dealing with the stress that they are feeling.
And I think that's so important. We saw that, you know, right away in November, that schools, for example,
Yes.
that came straight out and announced that immediately, they had less of the sort of overwhelming urgency that we've heard in some other schools in terms of kids seeking services. So I think you're right that building that sort of sanctuary. And for kids, that means different things. It means what you created in your home, like Dr. Fort said, about having that routine, having that common space, having that routine to be able to have the things and be a kid and not worry all the time. And certainly in schools, I think another place is also when you were talking about the mixed status families. You know, some kids don't feel like they can talk about their parent status because they're afraid for them. So really, how are we going to create those spaces, whether it's in schools, community centers, faith communities? Where is it where people feel like they can really seek out? And I think part of the work of the commission, and I know the work here of the center, is to help make sure that those frontline people, whether you're a teacher, an educator, whether you are a soccer coach, a Girl Scout leader, if you're someone that kids and families trust, you want to make sure that you're educated and try to link people to services. So I think you know, one of the final things I would want to say is that as we start to wrap up, is really thinking about, you know, you mentioned some assignments, you know, what's your first assignment? One person asked a question about the Bridge Act and said, how can we monitor the progress? Do you have suggestions? If people do want to step up and be advocates and contact Congress, what's the best way for them to sort of track what's happening with that first step, with the Bridge Act, for example?
You can, Congress has, I'm linking on their website, but you can put in any bill number and you can find it there. But really call your representatives, tweet. I right before this saw that the anti-immigrant faction is gearing up to start tweeting at the current president to push against his inaction on, you know, what he promised in DACA. So we need to be vocal, right? So get out there and tweet positive things about this, right? Share, you know, experiences, share, you know, why you're doing this, why you care. Your voice is important, and we got to get out there and, you know, and make more calls. We know that we're out there and there's the support out there.
And some people in Illinois might think, well, you told us our folks are already the leaders, but it's still helpful for them to count. So even if you're in a state that you feel like your leaders are behind your beliefs, you still want to contact them via phone calls, especially, as a way for them to count support. So I think as those of you that are listening, saying, you know, a couple of questions came in, well, what can I do? How do I help these families? I think that advocacy piece is certainly a place. I think we're seeing many of the agencies that are affiliated with the work have seen an increase in requests for volunteers. So if you're interested in looking online and learning about some legal resources, we will make these all available to you. But you also can reach out to these same agencies and say, what can I do as a volunteer? How could I help? But I think the final thing and the real message that we want to be really clear is that, you know, there's a lot of questions. And I think sometimes when we don't have answers, it makes us nervous. We feel like it's our responsibility to have the answers that our kids need. And this is one of those situations where we're not going to have all the answers. We don't know what's going to happen, but that doesn't mean that you're excused from your job of trying to create a protective shield for your kids. Whether they be your own kids or whether they be kids and families that you're interacting with, you really want to be thinking about, I am a role model, so if I don't have an answer, I'm going to find it. I'm going to look for other people who have expertise that I don't have, and we're going to try to really build their healthy resilience and role modeling and bring that action so that they can be successful. So I think it's really important to just realize that kids are watching, and that we can all model and demonstrate that there are ways to get through difficult times, and that's what our country has done for over 200 years and will continue to do. And hopefully some of these sites that are on the camera right now, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about some of the work we're doing on the mental health side, here's some places you can look. Also on the legal side. And finally, if we did not get to your question or if additional questions come up, please do not hesitate to send those directly to us at the Center for Childhood Resilience. We have access to all these wonderful experts who shared their time with you today, and we will do everything we can to make sure that we get as much information as possible to try to help decrease any sense of isolation or lack of information and really help give that hopefulness back. So thank you all for spending the afternoon with us. Thank you all who participated, and we hope that we will be providing additional seminars going forward that might target other areas and other populations that are concerned. So please also feel free to let us know if there's another population that you feel like is experiencing distress that we could come together and help support. Best of luck to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.